Well, the new CPI inflation report is out, and in a surprise to perhaps no one, your pockets might be feeling a little bit tighter. The price index for all items rose 0.3% over the month of January and 3.1% since January 2024. The Heritage Foundation's E.J. Antony made these graphs showing consumer staples gone through the roof since January of 2021. Basic energy components up 20% or more. Foods more expensive too. Eggs alone up almost 40% since 2021. And perhaps most damningly, monthly mortgage payments on the medium price home are up 90.4% in the last 3 years. Joining us now to weigh in on the latest CPI report and the state of the economy is economist at the Heritage Foundation, E.J. Antony. Welcome back to Rising. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
So summarize for us, we just read off some statistics, but how bad is it right now? Obviously, President Biden and White House surrogates have been talking about the improved economic situation or gradually improving economic situation, but of course we're still seeing these prices.
Oh, certainly, to describe the situation, I mean, in a word, terrible. Consumers are increasingly having to put things, and we're talking necessities here, not luxuries. They're continually having to put things on credit cards just to make ends meet. More and more Americans are having to take a second or even a third job. We have over 60% of people living paycheck to paycheck, and folks are just drowning right now in credit card debt, well over $1.1 trillion. I mean, it has gotten so bad, not just with credit card balances, but also credit card interest rates, that families are paying over $200 billion a year just in interest on those credit cards. That's not paying down the credit cards. You're not putting anything towards the balance. You're just paying the interest. So things have certainly gotten out of hand for a lot of American families. They're basically just digging themselves into a hole at this point.
To what do you attribute these interest rate rises with respect to mortgages, the cost of eggs being higher, and other kinds of consumer goods? What's going on here?
Well, the biggest culprit right now is just the sheer size of government spending. When the government spent, borrowed, and printed trillions upon trillions of dollars it didn't have, that devalued the dollar. So everything priced in dollars, which is everything that we buy, obviously, is going to go up in price because it takes more dollars to buy what you used to buy before with fewer dollars. But on top of that, you've also had a lot of bad policies out of this administration that have really hamstrung domestic energy. And as a consequence of that, it has driven up energy prices. Now, energy is a bit of a unique component within the economy because it affects everything we do and everything we buy. So as a consequence, when energy prices go up in the long run, everything else starts going up as well. And these factors have combined to create the catastrophe, frankly, that we have today. I mean, let's call it what it is. It is a cost of living crisis. In terms of things like mortgages, why have they gotten so expensive? Obviously, you have the price of the home itself that has gone up tremendously, but you also have the interest rates, which have gone up very high because those were raised belatedly to deal with 40-year high inflation. So now, if you're a prospective home buyer, not only do you have to deal with a home price that has gone up dramatically, but an interest rate that has in many cases tripled or quadrupled compared to where it was 3 years ago. So both of those things, again, have combined to create this terrible situation where you could be paying 90% more for the exact same house.
Help me understand this, because as you mentioned, and as we said in the read, egg prices are up from just a year ago. So obviously they did come down after the pandemic. And so the allegation that the reason some of these consumer goods have high prices being connected to the bailouts of the pandemic era don't seem to track, or at least don't seem to explain in the fluctuation. They haven't been permanently up. They're up from just last year. CNN reported that, as you pointed out, egg prices rose 8.5% compared to the month before in January, and they attribute the cause to a highly contagious, deadly avian flu that's wreaked havoc in the egg market, and also point to the fact that there have been some allegations that these legitimate troubles in the market are leading to price gouging. Of course, the egg industry had to pay $17.7 million in damages for price gouging they were accused of doing in the early 2000s. Do you credit any of those explanations?
No, not really, for a couple of reasons. Everyone on team transitory for inflation, they were saying that, oh, this is all just from supply chain problems. Well, all those supply chain problems have been resolved, and yet prices have not come down. You would expect not only for inflation to come down, but for prices to come down as well if all of the factors that were allegedly causing those price increases have gone away. And we have a lot of different indices that show that supply chains on average are right back to where they were before the pandemic, and yet prices are not. On the business front, this idea that businesses en masse are somehow gouging consumers, that doesn't even pass the smell test. Businesses right now I should say, have prices that are 20% higher than they were in January of 2021, which is exactly the same as the increase in consumer prices. In other words, businesses are simply passing along to consumers all of the cost increases that they are already paying. And that's one of the reasons why, although corporate profits are at record highs right now, if you adjust for inflation, they're not. In fact, they've actually fallen for several quarters.
I just want to drill down on this a little bit. I specifically asked, to what do you attribute the fact that prices did come down after the pandemic? Egg prices were down, and now they've gone back up. And it's really difficult for me to understand how you can attribute that to a bailout if you can't account for the fact that there have been variations in these prices. Also, it's not just, you said they don't think the price gouging passes the smell test, but it did pass the federal jury test insofar as that a federal jury found that these manufacturers, these egg producers, were in fact guilty and had to pay a multi-million-dollar settlement for proven price gouging. So how do you respond?
Well, I would love to see that proof. This wouldn't be the first time that a jury was wrong. But in terms of the spending, it's not as if government spending, these bailouts from 2020, all of a sudden stopped after 2020. What this administration has done is simply replace COVID emergency spending with other spending. They have taken deficits that were, again, supposedly for an emergency and institutionalized them. So now multi-trillion-dollar deficits are the norm. So it's not as if the inflationary impulse only existed in 2020 or even into 2021. It exists to this day. We have a treasury that continues to borrow well over $1 trillion a year. They'll probably be close to $2 trillion by the time this fiscal year is over. Thinking of things like eggs specifically, though, to your question, there are all kinds of fluctuations that happen within that market, but within all other food markets as well. It's not uncommon that you will have one month where prices are up, another month where prices are down. And that's why we look at the long-term trend. And the long-term trend for not just food, but prices in general over the last 3 years has been absolutely terrible. It is going nowhere but up.
What's the number one most immediate thing the Biden administration could do to actually bring down some of these prices?
It's a great question. And the very clear answer is to stop the excessive spending. We have to get that under control because that really is the first link in the chain, so to speak. If you cut the spending, then you can cut the borrowing, which relieves the pressure on the Federal Reserve to print the money to pay for all those unfunded deficits. So that means that you can immediately start bringing down inflation because you're no longer devaluing the dollar day after day. On top of that, it also reduces these violent changes in interest rates that we have seen over the last 3 years, which again would help alleviate the pressure, for example, in the housing market, and would help reduce a lot of financing costs for consumers on things like credit cards.
I've heard you make the case just now today that Biden should have spent less than the American people, and that Trump should have spent less than the American people in the checks that were given out to prevent people from falling into destitution during the pandemic. And you've also argued that despite record profits from billionaire CEOs, that they in fact aren't profiting as much as numbers would show, and that there should be some lifting of their burden. It does seem like all of your advice is pointing in one direction, which is that working class and poor people who are struggling to afford these consumer goods should not be bailed out, but that by making it easier for profits to flow freely to the top, that is going to have a trickle-down effect, that is going to bring egg prices down, and that also we shouldn't be concerned about proven cases of egg price gouging by these CEOs. And additionally, there shouldn't be any further spending to help let's say, cap prices or use antitrust to explore some of these food monopolies. What do you say to folks who say this seems like it's all a very pro 1%, pro corporate agenda? Where is the bailout that's ever going to happen for regular people in this country?
Respectfully, I'm not sure you've heard anything that I've said, because that seems like a completely different characterization than the things that I've actually said during this interview. But in terms of working
part
class
specifically,
folks,
though?
people with lower and middle income stratas, what should we be doing for those people? We need to remember inflation hits them the hardest. People who have high incomes, people who have high net wealth, they tend to have salaries which appreciate well during times of fast inflation. People who have a lot of assets, it doesn't matter if those are equities or if those are homes, whatever the case may be, those assets tend to appreciate in price very well with inflation. And so those folks tend to do just fine. But the people who really get crushed are the ones who don't have assets. Who are they? They tend to be lower and middle income. The working class folks, they also tend to have incomes which adjust very, very slowly to inflation. That's especially true for retirees, by the way, who are on fixed incomes. And so the thing that you can do to help those people the most is to keep inflation low.
Yes, but EJ, this is the issue. The Heritage Foundation, for example, advocates historically for sales taxes that disproportionately affect people who buy things, which is poor and working class and middle class people, as opposed to wealth taxes that affect the wealthiest people in the United States of America, right? Over and over again, the policies that get advocated, they're pitched as, well, this is easier, this is a flat tax, this applies equally to everyone, without paying attention to the fact, as you just pointed out, that different kinds of people in different classes earn their money very differently. And so you're absolutely right that the price gouging, that the costs of higher eggs, whether it's because of something like price gouging, whether it's because of something like the avian flu, which is largely unavoidable, is going to disproportionately affect poor and working people. But it does seem like there's a pattern of saying that you shouldn't bail people out, the poor and working people out, when there is a crisis.
Shouldn't bail anyone out. Should not bail out.
But that's not what he said.
He pushed.
Wait a minute. He pushed back. Wait a minute.
Excuse me. When did I
even use the
word bailout?
I'm using the word, not you. But you specifically
okay, well
made
then
reference.
please don't put words in my mouth and say that I'm saying to bail anyone out, because I have not said that.
I'm saying it. I'm saying it. And if I could get to this point, I'm specifically pointing to the fact that you alluded to record high corporate profits. Remember, billionaires doubled their wealth during the pandemic. Record high corporate profits right now. You brought up into this conversation, and I invite you to clarify that you don't think that those numbers are accurate and that they're in fact not profiting as much as they look like they're profiting. And the implication seemed to be that something needed to be done about that because they're being too limited and not profiting as much as they should. Am I wrong? Please do respond.
Again, you apparently have not listened to 90% of what I have said. I do not doubt the accuracy of record corporate profits. Those things are a matter of the public record. Anyone can look up the income statements of these corporations, for example, and see the numbers in black and white. That's not a question. The question is the real value of these corporate profits. So just as the average American family today has seen a paycheck grow pretty substantially, over $200 in terms of their weekly paycheck over the last 3 years, what that paycheck can actually buy has gone down. It's gone down by about $85. And so we are seeing similar trends for a lot of corporations, where if you just look at the dollars and cents, the nominal amount, their profits are up. But if you look at what those profits can actually buy, they are not necessarily up. For some businesses, absolutely they have increased. But for others, they are down, and down substantially.
Yeah, small businesses in particular are really struggling, in large part because the consumer base that patronizes small businesses, people in your community, restaurants and the like that struggled so much in the pandemic, they don't have a customer base that has enough money and liquidity to be able to spend on those kinds of goods anymore. And so crushing the poor and the working class ultimately does hurt the small business owner. And of course, the same effects are not true of big multinational corporations. Thank you so much for joining us today and explaining your worldview, EJ.
Thank you for having me.